Hello, hello, class. I am not here today. So instead of giving you the lecture that I would have given you today, I am recording it for you. Hopefully you were able to get here without too much of a problem. I think this will probably take about 30 minutes. You should have one of these guided note packets with you. And at the end of the lecture, you should be able to, hopefully, answer these big questions here and then also be able to define these key terms. There are a couple points in the guided notes where I'll want you to actually write stuff down. And then there's other big sections where you can just follow along. I'll point out the parts where I want you to stop and actually write some stuff down. But don't feel like you just have to frantically write down everything I say because most of it's in the guided notes packet. Okay, so let's get started. This is the first lecture for Unit 2 of our course, which is going to look at the rise of the British and French empires, and then is going to look at how the United States breaks away from the British and French empires, or the British Empire as it actually is. So anyway, we're going to be looking at what was going on in Europe, and we're going to be looking at how events in Europe led to the rise of new colonial empires in North America. Let me go ahead and share my screen. Okay, here we go. All right, yeah, so welcome to our slideshow. This is a picture here showing the Dutch settlement of New Amsterdam around the year 1650. You can see here that there's a big fort. This is where Europeans would keep their cannons and their most valuable stuff. And then a small town. British or Dutch ships would show up here with lots of goodies, and then they would trade with the indigenous people for valuable commodities, including stuff like fur, and then ship those furs back to Amsterdam for profit. So what we're going to see during this time period from 1600 to 1750 is colonies like this popping up all along the coast of North America. Colonies like this popping up all along the coast of North America, as well as trading posts popping up around the world in Africa and Asia as well. And we'll be trying to understand the causal factors behind the rise of these new trading empires. So here are some big picture questions that I want you guys to be able to answer by the end of the lecture. I'll basically be telling you the answers to these. All you got to do is pay attention. One, how did conflict in Europe help to cause the second wave of European colonial expansion? How does capitalism boost the power of colonial governments? What factors help to explain the rise of the British Empire starting around 1600? How do the different parts of the British Empire work together to create a global economic system? And what are the relative strengths and weaknesses of the French Empire compared to Britain? And here's a bunch of vocabulary terms. I will be defining these as we go through. Some of them are already defined in the guided notes. Others you might want to write down, but I'll point these out as we go. Okay, so moving on to some maps. So this is just to give you some context about where we are and where we're headed in the class. We just finished Unit 1, which looks at the time period from 1450 to 1600. This is sometimes known as the first wave of colonial expansion, in which we see mostly Spain and Portugal colonizing large chunks of the world. Spain, as we talked about a lot, conquers Mexico, the Caribbean, South America, and then also makes efforts to expand up into North America, but these are mostly unsuccessful. Portugal, in the meantime, has been focusing on exploring around the coast of Africa and setting up trading posts. They have set up trading posts in West Africa, East Africa, and they've also taken over crucial trading posts in the Middle East, India, and Indonesia, or what was then called the Spice Islands. So that's the first wave of colonial expansion. Here's where we're headed, though, in the next 150 years. So you can see by 1754, colonial empires have massively expanded. So don't worry about Russia. We're not really going to talk about Russia. We're really focused on these new powers up here. So you've got France, England, and the Netherlands. These three powers in Northern Europe are expanding and are going to build extensive colonies in North America. Notice the French in Canada and the British on the east coast of the United States, as well as setting up powerful and very profitable colonies in the Caribbean, important trading posts in West Africa, and trading posts, or in some cases, colonial empires in the Indian Ocean in India and Indonesia. So what we're going to be looking at today is what factors allow for the rise of England, France, and the Netherlands to expand and to set up these new empires. All right, here we go. So some big questions to think about is, one, why do Spain and Portugal slow down? They were way ahead at first, but during this 150-year period from 1600 to 1750, Spain and Portugal slow down while France, Britain, and the Netherlands catch up, and by the end of this time period, clearly surpass Spain and Portugal as the new major powers in the colonial game. So that's question number 2. I anticipated it. And then 3 is, what are the big consequences of this new wave of colonial expansion? These are questions that we'll be engaging with throughout this unit, especially this third one. What does it mean for the world that Britain, France, and the Netherlands are emerging as major global trading powers during this time period? If you look right here, this is a castle currently flying in this picture here, flying a Dutch flag. This castle was built off the coast of West Africa. It is called Elmina Castle. And this is a site where millions of enslaved Africans were stored and then shipped out across the Atlantic Ocean to work mostly in plantations in Brazil and the Caribbean. Elmina Castle is still there today. It's a UNESCO World Heritage Site. You can go visit it. And it is kind of a monument to the huge impact that European colonial empires had on communities around the world. Okay, so let's talk about what was going on in Europe around the year 1600. So around the year 1600, Europe is a continent at war. There are massive wars raging basically around throughout Europe in 1600, and these wars are going to continue for a very long time, basically unbroken throughout this time period for a variety of reasons. There's a couple of different big factors that are leading to this continuous and intensifying warfare. First, there are a bunch of different powerful competing states in Europe that are all trying to emerge as dominant. Second, new military technologies and military tactics emerge that make warfare more destructive. And third, there's a huge cultural break in Europe in which one of the big unifying factors that actually kept Europeans together, Catholic Christianity, breaks apart and splinters into a bunch of different competing versions of Christianity. And so all three of these factors are going to work together to cause massive amounts of conflict in Europe during this time period. So those are some of the big causes of war in Europe during this time period. There's a bunch of important results that happen from these wars. But probably the most important result for our purposes in this class, which after all is American history, is the emergence of 3 new important colonial empires: the French Empire, the British Empire, and the Dutch Empire. So we're going to go through and we're going to look a little bit more closely at these 3 big causes for war, and then we'll stop and think about how these factors help to motivate the creation of new colonial empires. Also, if you're looking at this picture here, this is a Spanish army. You can see in this picture some of the new weapons that are used during the military revolution, including muskets and pikes. And you can also see that the Spanish, true to form, have a Catholic monk in front of them holding a cross. It was normal for Spanish armies to receive a blessing before they went into battle. That way, if they died, their souls would be prepared to go to heaven. Brutal. So just to give you a sense of how many wars were fought, here is a list of all of the wars fought in Europe just between 1600 and 1650. Warfare was just a normal part of life during this time period, and it's probably the single most violent period in European history until we get to the period of the World Wars in the early 20th century. If you want, you can pause and read up on any of these wars. A lot of them are crazy, especially the 30 Years' War that breaks out in 1618. So anyway, one of the big reasons that Europe is at war is because of ongoing competition between different state powers. First of all, there are 4 big powers that are all fighting with each other for dominance. We've got Spain, who is super powerful because they've taken over the New World. We got France, which is the most populous country in Europe. About 20 million people live in France. That's almost 10 times as many people as live in England. We got the Ottoman Empire over here that is seeking to expand into Europe. And then we have Austria over here, this green area labeled Habsburg, who is doing everything in their power to unite all of these little countries together in Germany and fight back against the Ottoman Empire. So you've got these 4 big powers all fighting each other. And then you've also got a bunch of little tiny powers also fighting, trying to just survive. And that includes a bunch of guys, but the 2 we want to keep our eyes on are England here and the Netherlands, with its capital of Amsterdam here. And the Netherlands can also sometimes be called the Dutch Empire, as we'll see later. So all of these states are fighting with each other for control, and it's as a result of their competitions that a lot of these wars break out. Second, warfare is becoming more deadly, and some countries are advancing much more rapidly in the art of war than others. This period of rapid military change and development is called the Military Revolution. So there's a couple different things that happen during this time period that are worth paying attention to. Basically, what we see here is the end of the medieval style of war of putting on armor and stabbing people, and the rise of professional armies armed primarily with gunpowder weapons, that is, muskets and cannons. So some folks call this the gunpowder revolution, which is just the emergence of gunpowder as the dominant military technology. By the year 1700, guns are the main way people fight. Stabbing is now a secondary thing, and armor is no longer important because guns shoot through armor. The 2 main weapons that are emerge as the main ways that people fight, are the musket, which you can see here, basically a big, inaccurate, scary gun that can fire about 1 musket ball a minute in the hands of an average user. You have to load each shot by itself, but it's a huge bullet, and if it hits you, you die. And then second, you see the rise of cannons, specifically siege cannons designed to blow up castles and allow armies to attack and control fortified positions. So as a result of the gunpowder revolution, you see a bunch of different important changes. First is the decline of medieval nobles, the knights in shining armor, who were in charge of European warfare in the Middle Ages and who basically took over Mexico. The Spanish conquistadors were essentially medieval warriors, decline. Armored knights no longer matter. Castles don't really work because you can just blow them both up with gunpowder. Second, you see the rise of common professional soldiers. You no longer need an elite military caste to fight because basically anybody can learn how to use a musket pretty effectively in a couple of weeks. And so what happens is rulers need lots and lots of professionally trained and loyal troops to fight for them. This is expensive, which in turn leads to the last big impact of the military revolution, which is the rise of centralized states. Kings need lots of money in order to pay for their new professional armies. And that means that kings are going to need to get as much money as possible in the form of taxation. And taxation is easily gained by trading. What you're going to see is that the states that are able to centralize, get money, and then build up large armies of professional soldiers are going to expand and become more powerful. Whereas smaller states that struggle to raise armies equipped with the most modern weapons are going to fall apart. So it's basically sink or swim time in Europe. Get the money, build up the modern armies equipped with guns, or get conquered. Here are some images showing you what warfare looks like once muskets and cannons are introduced. This is the classic formation that armies fight in after the introduction of gunpowder, which is basically a giant block of men armed with guns and pointy sticks. In this picture here, you can see that the guns are also pointy sticks. The guns have little spear points attached at the end. These are known as bayonets, which allows the average soldier both to act as a shooter with his musket, but also to fight in close combat and ward off charging horses and other stuff like that, as you can see here. These are British troops fixed into a square position, holding off charging French cavalry with their bayonets. This picture here is a battle from 1631, showing the scale of this new age of warfare. In the Middle Ages, battles tended to be kind of small, fought between small groups of maybe 1,000 or a couple thousand armored warriors. After the military revolution, battles become absolutely massive. This is the Battle of Breitenfeld, one of the big battles of the 30 Years' War, in which a total of 71,000 troops were involved. And you can see the lines of troops just stretching to the horizon as the two armies clash here. Warfare is incredibly expensive, and to pay for all of these troops and all of the equipment, governments are desperate to get money in whatever way they can. And colonies are a pretty good way to get some money. And now, the last big cause for warfare in Europe during this time period is the Protestant Reformation and the Wars of Religion. The Protestant Reformation is a big cultural shift in Europe in which religious thinkers throughout Northern Europe reject the authority of the Catholic Church. So before 1517, basically every European, except for small groups of Jews, Muslims, or heretics, accepted the authority of the Catholic Church and the Pope based in Rome. But starting around 1517 with a guy named Martin Luther, a bunch of influential people are going to rise up and they're going to reject the authority of the Catholic Church and create their own versions of Christianity. Martin Luther comes first, developing a branch of Christianity that is now known as Lutheranism, but a bunch of other people follow. One of the most influential thinkers is a guy named John Calvin, who develops a type of Christianity that has a variety of names. Sometimes it's called Calvinism. Other times, especially in the United States, it's known as Presbyterianism. And then another big guy around the same time, who is also just happens to be King of England, Henry VIII, develops his own branch of Christianity that is sometimes known as Anglicanism, sometimes known as the Church of England, and in the United States is known as Episcopalianism. All of these different branches of Christianity have a variety of different ideas, but the main thing that they all share is that they reject the Catholic Church, and they are all together known as Protestant. The United States today has a bunch of different religions, but Protestantism remains the single largest type of religion that is practiced in the United States. Now, the reason that this is a big deal is that these ideas become so popular that a whole bunch of different Northern European states adopt these ideas as their official religion. So basically, they reject the Catholic Church and they instead start their own versions of Christianity. This happens in a variety of places, but mostly in some of the smaller minor powers in Northern Europe, including England, the Netherlands, Sweden, Denmark, and Northern Germany. These ideas will then travel with Northern European empires into North America. Here's a map showing the different religions. The dark orange is Catholic, and the green is Protestant. Now, here are some pictures. That's Martin Luther there, that's John Calvin, and that is Henry VIII looking proud. These are the three big guys who developed Protestant ideas in the early 1500s. Now, the reason that the Protestant Reformation matters for us is that it creates massive amounts of tension and violence, both within countries and between countries. The idea of religious toleration basically does not exist at this point. And so what that means is that the Protestants want to get rid of all the Catholics in their area, and the Catholics want to force all of the Protestants to come back and to become Catholic once again. So within countries, this leads to a variety of measures to crack down on whichever religion the government doesn't agree with. And governments on both sides rely on a variety of different measures to enforce their ideas. Censorship is quite popular. One famous example of this is the Catholic Church creates the Index of Banned Books in 1563, where they start banning anti-Catholic ideas. They also have a system for punishing heresy, that is for people who disagree with their version of Christianity. And this can be seen in the creation of the Roman Inquisition in 1542. This was basically a professional body dedicated to going around and finding Protestants and killing them. This is a picture here in Spain, in which the Spanish government was burning to death a whole bunch of heretics sometime during the 1500s. So basically, anybody who rejected Catholicism risked getting tortured and burned to death. And this also resulted in a bunch of civil wars where Protestants and Catholics within a single country fought against each other for control. One of the biggest ones happened in France between 1562 and 1598. But conflict didn't just happen within countries, it also happened between countries. The Protestant states and the Catholic states fought a whole bunch of different wars with each other for about 100 years. You saw Protestantism versus Catholicism as one of the biggest defining factors in international conflicts. So three big wars that happen are the 80 Years' War between Catholic Spain and the Protestant Netherlands, the defeat of the Spanish Armada, in which Spain attempts to invade England and England defeats the Armada and survives. And then the 30 Years' War, where basically everybody in Europe piles up against Spain. This is largely a Protestant versus Catholic thing, but one thing weird that happens is that France actually switches sides and fights with all of the Protestants against Spain in order to crush them. That is kind of an overview of the different causes of warfare during this time period. Now, there's a bunch of different results that we should keep in mind. This actually isn't in your guided notes, but you can just kind of soak this slide in. So first of all, European militaries get a lot better during this time period. Because of competition, people are continually adopting new and better techniques. So by the end of this time period at 1648, European armies are very advanced, very large, and very well trained. Europe has jumped ahead and is probably at this point the most militarily advanced society on the planet. Second, Protestantism survives. In spite of the wars of religion, the Protestants are able to work together to fight off the attacks of Catholic Spain. And in 1648, with the Peace of Westphalia, the Protestant states receive official recognition from the Pope. So Protestantism is now here to stay. However, because of all of this violence, people remain very distrustful of people from different religions. So for example, in Protestant England, Catholicism is actually persecuted legally until 1821, when Catholics received full civil rights in England. In Spain, Protestantism is suppressed until 1978. So the division between Catholics and Protestants lasts for a very long time. It's only pretty recently that Catholics and Protestants have basically been chill with each other. And last of all, there are some pretty big results of these wars in terms of shifting levels of power. Spain is the big loser of these wars. Even though Spain was super rich and had lots of money, they basically lose these wars and as a result end up much less powerful and bankrupt by 1648. So Spain, which was a major power at the beginning of this time period, is now basically out of the picture for a while. A big result of the decline of Spain is that France emerges as the new major military superpower. France has defeated Spain and now emerges as the big player on the continent. And last of all, during these conflicts, Britain and the Netherlands both emerge as new great powers, and we will talk about how they're able to pull that off in a minute. So at this point, you might want to pause and think about how these different how these conflicts might have led to the rise of new maritime empires. We'll go over this in class when I'm back, but think about how all of these wars might motivate different parts of Europe to try and expand colonially. Also, I just think this is a really sweet picture. This shows how lines of professional soldiers with pointy sticks could hold off charging horsemen. By pointing a bunch of sticks in the same direction, you could basically make a wall of spikes that would prevent the horses from just trampling you and your buddies. Cool. So pause for a second. Try to write down some different ways that these conflicts could cause maritime empires. And then when you're ready, hit play and we'll go on to talk about England. Okay, you ready? Here we go. So we're going to be moving forward now to talk about the second wave of colonial expansion that happens between 1600 and 1750. By 1750, this is what the map of North America is going to look like. So Spain is going to continue to claim the southwest of North America, including New Mexico and Colorado and Texas. The British are going to claim the entire East Coast, as well as parts of Canada. And the French are going to claim this big swath of territory that goes through Canada, through the Great Lakes, and then down the Mississippi to New Orleans. Also, there's going to be serious competition in the Caribbean for valuable sugar islands. So what we're going to be looking at is the rise of three new colonial powers: the French Empire, the British Empire, and the Dutch Empire. Why does this happen? Well, for one reason, there are some serious motivations that all three of these new empires share. First, they want to copy the Spanish. The Spanish were able to dominate Europe for about 150 years because of all the money they got from their empire. And the British and the French and the Dutch want to do the same. Second, these guys are all fighting major wars. And so they need to find ways to pay for these wars and to pay for their massive armies. Colonies are a good way to do that. And third, religious minorities, people who are being persecuted in their home country, are going to look to the Americas as a place where they can find some degree of religious freedom and religious toleration. Now, one big question is, it makes sense that France was able to do this because France was a big, powerful country. They were the new superpower. But one big question is, how were these little guys able to do this? How are the minor powers of Britain and the Dutch able to build these massive empires? And the answer to this question is capitalism. Basically, what happens is around the year 1600, Britain and the Netherlands invent a new economic system that allows them to fund massive empires, even though they are very small countries. So we're going to take a quick aside here and look at and try to understand how capitalism works and how it emerged during this time period. So, first of all, what is capitalism? Before we answer that, I want to identify and define two key terms. So if you go to box number 8 on your guided notes, you'll see two key terms are not defined: capital and investment. I want to define capital for you right now. Capital is a form of wealth that you use to generate more wealth. That's it. Capital is a form of wealth that you use to generate more wealth. If it is a form of wealth that you're just sitting on and enjoying and using, like maybe a fancy car or a, luxurious food items, that's not capital, that's just wealth. But if it is a form of wealth that you're using to generate new money, then it's capital. So this could be land that you're using to farm. This could be a factory that you're using to create new stuff, or it could be stocks. That is wealth that you've invested in other companies in order to generate more money. Second, what is investment? Investment is just what you do with capital. Investment is taking capital and using it in such a way that you generate more capital. Now, the cool thing about capital is that when you invest it, it generates more wealth, and you can then invest that wealth too, which leads to a feedback loop in which you use your wealth to generate wealth, to generate wealth, to generate wealth. This can lead and has led to exponential economic growth. So now that we know what capital is and what investment is, let's talk about capitalism. Capitalism is an economic system characterized by these four things. One, individuals control most capital, not the government. So this means that individual private people like me or you or Jeff Bezos control most of the capital in the society, and that the capital is not controlled by the government. Second, in a capitalist society, wealthy individuals, who are sometimes called capitalists, invest their capital to make a profit. This is how stuff gets done. In a capitalist society, if you want to make something, if you want to do something, usually it is done by capitalists who invest money in order to make a profit. Three, in a capitalist society, profits generated from investments become new capital and are then reinvested. This allows for exponential economic growth. Four, in a capitalist society, governments play a limited role. The main thing that governments focus on doing is protecting private property from theft or damage, and then seeking to create new opportunities for investment. So opening up new lands for farming, taking over new territories for companies to colonize, stuff like that. So that is basically how capitalism works. You allow people to invest their money. These folks get rich. They invest their capital back into new projects, and the cycle continues, while the government prevents theft, piracy, or invasion and looks for new places where capital could be invested. This is an incredibly powerful system because it makes it possible for governments to use private wealth to fund big projects like colonial empires. There are also, and this is a huge topic that we'll talk about a lot, very serious limits and downsides to this system. And we'll talk about that in class. Now, let's talk about specifically what enabled capitalism to work during this time period. Why didn't earlier countries do capitalism? And the reason for this is that around the year 1600, Britain and France developed a number of new financial and economic techniques that make capitalism possible. If you don't have most of these things, the system where rich people invest their money in order to create profits and then reinvest that wealth just doesn't work. Rich people tend to use their money for other stuff like big parties or castles, stuff like that. So here are some of the things that Britain and the Dutch develop around the year 1600. In some places, the Dutch invent these things first. In some places, Britain invents these things first. But the thing is that both of these guys around the year 1600 are figuring all of these technologies out. So you can think of these 5 things as basically economic or financial technologies that unlock capitalism as a new economic system. So let's go through these. Now, for each of these, I'm going to explain basically the main idea, how it works, basically what it is, and then how it works and connects back to the creation of capital and investment. So you should write this down in your guided notes. First, for capitalism to work, you need legal property rights. That is, the government is not just allowed to take your stuff randomly. If the government can just randomly take your stuff, there is no reason to invest your wealth. Because you might spend your whole life building up a big business or building up an awesome stock portfolio, and then the government will just take it all and you're poor again. So by creating a system of legal property rights rooted in constitutional government, Britain and the Netherlands are able to create a system that encourages people to invest their money. Second, Britain and the Netherlands both develop national banks. These are government-backed banks in which the government guarantees the security of any money that you deposit in them. This is important for a couple of reasons. And first, it creates a safe place for rich people to store their wealth. So it becomes possible to accrue massive fortunes, and you don't have to worry about them getting stolen or destroyed. Second, national banks can then take that money that's deposited and loan it out. And these loans allow other people to get money that they can then invest in new companies. Banks are really powerful because they simultaneously allow you to store your money safely, but then simultaneously use that money. It's kind of like you get to have your cake and eat it too. The money that is stored in the banks then gets loaned out to generate more profit and investment. And then last of all, banks also enable the creation of the first functional paper currencies in Europe. What you can do is you can drop off silver or gold at a bank, and the bank will then issue paper notes that can be exchanged for silver at other banks. These are sometimes known as bills of exchange, and this allows for the creation of effective paper money, which is much lighter to carry around than big sacks of gold and silver. Cool. So that's banks. Third, this one's really important. The creation of government bonds, which is also sometimes known as national debt. Basically, a government bond is when somebody loans money to the government and the government promises to pay them back later with interest. The government is basically borrowing money from its own citizens. Now, how does this work? Why is this important? Government bonds are important because they encourage private individuals to give the government money. So if the government needs to do something really, really expensive, like let's say fight a war or take over India, the government can borrow a whole bunch of money from its citizens and promise to pay them back later with interest. This works out really well for both sides. The government gets the money that it needs, and wealthy people get a very safe investment because the government, as long as it's not like fully taken over or there's a revolution or something, will pay back its debts. Fourth, in both Britain and the Netherlands, we see the rise of something called joint stock companies. And later, these will evolve into full-fledged stock markets. But the basic idea here is that if individual people want to invest in a very big project, they usually don't have enough money to do this. So like even very wealthy Englishmen didn't have enough money to fund a voyage to India by themselves. So what they would do is they would pool their money together and create joint stock companies. This was a super powerful idea because it meant that anybody with even a little bit of wealth could start investing in massive and super profitable colonial projects. So how it worked is an individual person would go to a stock market. They would give a certain amount of money to a stockbroker, and they could then buy portions of stock companies. So you could buy stock in the Virginia Company or the East India Company. And what this meant is that by buying stock, you were giving that money to the company, and in exchange, you became a partial owner of that company. You would then receive a share of that company's profits in the form of a dividend. And you could sell your stock to somebody else if you decided you no longer wanted to be a part of that company. This is crucial. This allows for massive amounts of capital to be invested in huge projects that in some cases are doing the work of empire for the government. We'll talk about this more later. And then last of all, and pretty straightforward, is the rise of an insurance company. So anybody who is investing millions and millions of dollars in a massive project is going to want to have insurance. So like, for example, if you invest all of your money in a ship and then the ship catches on fire, you've all of a sudden gone from being very wealthy to being completely poor. The creation of insurance makes sure that this doesn't happen. So how it works is basically for a small fee, you enter into a contract with an insurance company, and the insurance company says that as long as you keep paying this small fee every month, if anything terrible happens, we will pay you back for anything that you lose. So you can take out insurance on your ships, you can take out insurance on your buildings, your factories, and stuff like that. And so this just makes it much safer for people to invest large amounts of money. You're not risking your entire social status and livelihood if you invest a big chunk of change in a ship or a factory or something like that. So now, all of these things fit together and create, basically make it possible for the capitalist system to emerge. With these systems in place, it now becomes very rational for wealthy individuals to begin investing their money in order to make profits. And this leads to a cycle in which more and more wealth is generated, and then more and more wealth is invested as capital in order to make even more money. This is the beginning of modern economics and the beginning of a massive increase in global productivity and wealth. So this is going to be the last slide for this particular video. And the question basically is, why is capitalism so powerful? This is a picture of Amsterdam harbor around the year 1600. Amsterdam is that city back there with those spires, and in front you can see hundreds of ships coming in from all over the world bearing wealthy commodity or valuable commodities, ready to sell them and exchange them in the markets of Amsterdam. So why is capitalism such an effective way for organizing commerce and colonialization? Here's why. First of all, capitalism allows for private capital, that is individual wealth, to be used to pursue imperial projects. By allowing wealthy people to invest in big projects, all of a sudden, private individuals start funding trade missions. They can start, you can take out loans to fight wars from private individuals who will loan the government money, and individuals can start affording to set up colonies across the seas. So basically, it unlocks a huge amount of wealth that then can be used for colonial projects that previously could only be done by governments. Second, capitalism allows wealthy people to profit from imperial success. By loaning money to the government, they can earn interest. And by setting up joint stock companies to engage in trade or colonization, they can reap massive profits. So this creates a symbiotic relationship between governments and wealthy citizens. Basically, they are both benefiting from this system and sharing the profits of empire. Also, new businesses that are set up by the wealthy in order to make profit create lots of new jobs for lower class workers and make sure that there are very low rates of unemployment in these capitalist countries as long as they continue to successfully expand. Now, this is how Britain and the Netherlands are able to even the odds between themselves and the major powers like Spain and France. They figure out capitalism first, and they are able to unlock huge new sources of wealth in order to pay for trading missions, navies, and colonization. That is how capitalism is going to lead eventually to the rise of the massive and powerful British Empire. All right, so that's it for today. Thanks so much, everybody. I hope you learned some stuff, and I will be back soon with another installment of Carolina Friends, American History.